Look around. Look at yourself. Every scar, every struggle, every setback you've endured, it all tells a story. And the truth is this: if you're still here, breathing, thinking, planning, pushing, then you already won the first and most important battle. Survival isn't luck, it's a choice. And you've been making it every single day, even when it didn't feel like victory. Let me be clear, this isn't a pep talk filled with empty words. I'm not here to tell you that everything will be easy or that life owes you anything. Life doesn't care. What matters is what you do with the time you have, the choices you make, and the sacrifices you're willing to endure. Today, I want to walk you through 5 principles, the kind of principles that separate those who only dream from those who quietly build, who quietly win. These aren't just lessons, they're life equations. If you apply them, you'll realize something profound. The fact that you're still standing is proof you're already ahead. Most people think they are short on money, when in reality they are short on control of their time. That misunderstanding quietly shapes the direction of their entire life. Time is the one resource that arrives equally for everyone and leaves without negotiation. You don't get more of it for being talented, unlucky, educated, or well-intentioned. It shows up each morning, and by night it's gone, whether you used it deliberately or let it leak through distraction. The uncomfortable truth is that the quality of your future is not determined by big dramatic decisions, but by how you spend ordinary hours when no one is watching. Every choice you make with your time has a trade-off, even when you pretend it doesn't. Saying yes to one thing is quietly saying no to another. Scroll long enough, complain long enough, wait long enough, and the cost is invisible but permanent. People rarely feel the damage in the moment. It shows up years later as frustration, regret, or the feeling of being behind without knowing exactly why. Time doesn't punish loudly. It compounds silently. Small daily misuses don't ruin you overnight. They slowly redirect your life until one day you wake up living a result you never consciously chose. Look at 2 people with similar backgrounds, intelligence, and opportunities. One consistently uses spare time to learn, to build, to rest with intention, to think. The other fills those same hours with noise, avoidance, and low-effort pleasure. In the beginning, their lives look identical. Same income, same stress, same complaints. 5 years later, one has leverage skills, clarity, optionality. The other feels stuck, overworked, and resentful. The difference wasn't motivation or luck. It was how each person respected the value of time when the payoff wasn't immediate. The hardest part about valuing time is that it requires long-term thinking in a short-term world. Most people optimize for how they feel today, not for where they'll be standing years from now. They trade future freedom for present comfort, future strength for present relief. There's nothing dramatic about it. It looks like staying up late when you know you should rest, avoiding difficult conversations, postponing learning because it feels inconvenient, or staying busy with tasks that feel productive but move nothing meaningful forward. These choices don't feel dangerous because they're socially normal. That's why they're effective at quietly destroying outcomes. When you truly understand time as a finite asset, your behavior changes without motivation. You stop arguing with reality. You become more selective. You don't need disciplined speeches. You need clarity. You begin to notice how often you say you're too busy for what matters, but never too busy for what doesn't. You start asking uncomfortable questions. Is this activity building something that will still matter in 5 years, or is it just helping me avoid discomfort today? Is this relationship adding depth to my life, or just filling space? Is this job teaching me something valuable, or just draining my best energy? Opportunity cost becomes impossible to ignore. Every hour spent on something low value is an hour not spent strengthening something high value. People talk about missed opportunities as if they're rare events, but most opportunities are missed daily, quietly, through misallocation. Not because someone wasn't capable, but because their attention was fragmented. Focus is not about intensity, it's about consistency. A scattered mind spends time everywhere and builds nothing. A focused mind may move slowly, but it moves in one direction long enough to create real progress. You can see this in everyday life. The person who says they want change but never schedules time to think. The person who says family matters most but is always mentally absent. The person who wants financial stability but never tracks where their hours actually go. These are not character flaws, they're accounting errors. Time, like money, requires awareness before it can be managed. If you don't know where it's going, you can't expect a meaningful return. There's also a deeper emotional layer to time that people avoid acknowledging. Wasting time is often a way of avoiding responsibility for your own potential. When you commit your time seriously, you commit to finding out what you're capable of. That's uncomfortable. It's easier to stay distracted than to confront the possibility that consistent effort might actually change your life. Misuse of time often masquerades as rest, entertainment, or social obligation, but underneath, it's fear of long-term accountability. Respecting time doesn't mean living like a machine. It means choosing intentionally. Rest becomes an investment instead of an escape. Enjoyment becomes deliberate instead of compulsive. Work becomes focused instead of endless. You stop confusing motion with progress. You understand that being busy is not the same as building value. You allow boredom because boredom creates space for thought, and thought creates direction. When people finally change their relationship with time, they often say life feels calmer, not more intense. That's because clarity reduces internal conflict. You no longer feel pulled in 10 directions because you've decided which directions matter. You accept trade-offs instead of resenting them. You know that saying no is not loss, it's protection. Protection of energy, protection of focus, protection of the future version of yourself who will live with the consequences of today's choices. Time doesn't care about your intentions, your excuses, or your circumstances. It responds only to action and allocation. If you give it structure, it gives you progress. If you give it chaos, it gives you stress. If you give it nothing, it gives you nothing back. This isn't motivational, it's mechanical. Inputs create outputs. Hours spent learning create competence. Hours spent building create assets. Hours spent avoiding create stagnation. The quiet truth is that if you are still here, you have already been given enough time to change something meaningful. If you choose to treat it with respect, not perfectly, not dramatically, just honestly. 1 hour used well each day compounds into a life that makes sense. 1 hour wasted each day compounds into confusion. The difference is subtle, but the outcome is permanent. Pain is one of the few things in life that never lies to you. It doesn't flatter, it doesn't exaggerate, and it doesn't arrive without a reason. Yet most people spend their lives trying to avoid it, numb it, or pretend it shouldn't exist. That avoidance feels reasonable in the moment, but it comes with a hidden cost. When you reject pain entirely, you also reject the information it carries. And pain always carries information. Every difficult experience is a signal that something collided with reality. A failed relationship reveals patterns you tolerated too long. A financial setback exposes habits that didn't match your goals. A rejection shows where preparation, timing, or alignment was missing. None of this means you were broken. It means you were tested. Pain doesn't exist to humiliate you. It exists to educate you. The problem is that education only happens if you're willing to look directly at what hurts instead of rushing to escape it. Most people confuse pain with failure. They believe that discomfort is evidence they're on the wrong path, when in many cases it's proof they finally stepped onto a path that requires growth. Comfort rarely demands change. Pain does. That's why growth often feels isolating. When you're uncomfortable, you're usually ahead of your old habits, but not yet rewarded by new results. This in-between phase is where many people turn back, not because they can't continue, but because they misinterpret pain as a warning instead of a signal. Think about learning any difficult skill. At first, you're slow, awkward, and painfully aware of your limitations. That awareness stings. It exposes gaps in competence and confidence. Many people quit at this stage and tell themselves it wasn't meant for them. But the ones who continue understand something subtle. The pain is temporary, but the skill is permanent. The discomfort of learning is the entrance fee to capability. There is no other door. Pain also forces prioritization. When life is easy, people drift. When it hurts, attention sharpens. You stop wasting energy on what doesn't matter. You stop pretending every option is equally important. A crisis strips away illusions. It shows you which relationships are real, which goals are essential, and which habits are unsustainable. This clarity is uncomfortable, but it's valuable. People who never experience meaningful pain often live shallow lives, not because they lack opportunity, but because nothing ever forced them to decide who they actually are. There's a quiet difference between pain that builds you and pain that erodes you. The difference is reflection. Pain without reflection hardens into bitterness. Pain with reflection turns into wisdom. Two people can experience the same setback and walk away with opposite outcomes. One becomes defensive and resentful, blaming circumstances or others. The other becomes observant, asking what choices led here and what needs to change. The event is identical. The interpretation is not. That interpretation determines the trajectory that follows. Long-term thinkers treat pain as a data point, not a verdict. They ask practical questions instead of emotional ones. What failed? Why did it fail? What variables were ignored? What assumptions were wrong? This approach doesn't deny emotion, but it doesn't let emotion drive decisions. Feelings pass. Lessons compound. The ability to sit with discomfort long enough to extract meaning is a competitive advantage in a world addicted to immediate relief. Avoiding pain often looks like distraction, endless entertainment, constant busyness, shallow conversations. These aren't harmless habits, they are coping mechanisms. They dull awareness, but they also delay progress. When pain is postponed, it doesn't disappear, it waits. And when it returns, it's usually heavier, more complex, and harder to resolve. Addressing discomfort early is cheaper than ignoring it until it becomes a crisis. There is also pain that comes from discipline and pain that comes from neglect. They feel similar in the moment but lead to opposite outcomes. The pain of discipline is chosen. It has a direction. Waking up early, saying no, doing the work when motivation is absent, these actions sting, but they build strength, trust, and momentum. The pain of neglect is unchosen but predictable. Poor health, financial stress, broken trust, regret. One pain is temporary and purposeful. The other is long-lasting and directionless. You will experience pain either way. The question is which kind you're willing to tolerate. Human behavior often defaults to short-term comfort because the brain is wired to avoid immediate threat. But in modern life, the real threats are slow and subtle. Inactivity, complacency, and avoidance don't feel dangerous today. Their consequences show up years later when options are fewer and energy is lower. Pain that arrives early is often a warning. Pain that arrives late is often a bill. People who grow resilient don't become numb, they become accurate. They stop personalizing every hardship and start contextualizing it. Not everything is about you, but everything that happens to you is an opportunity to learn how you respond under pressure. Pressure reveals priorities. It shows whether you default to blame or responsibility, avoidance or adjustment. These responses repeated over time quietly shape identity. When you accept pain as part of being alive, something unexpected happens. Fear loses its power. You realize that discomfort didn't destroy you before, and it won't now. This doesn't make life easier, but it makes you steadier. You stop overreacting to setbacks. You recover faster. You waste less time feeling sorry for yourself, and more time correcting course. Emotional resilience isn't about being tough. It's about being honest with yourself when things hurt. Pain also humbles ambition in a useful way. It reminds you that progress is rarely linear. There will be pauses, reversals, and setbacks. Expecting a smooth path is not optimism, it's ignorance. When ambition is paired with realism, pain becomes less shocking. You prepare for it, budget for it, and learn from it instead of collapsing under it. You understand that every meaningful pursuit carries a cost, and pain is often part of the price. If you are still standing, after moments that once felt unbearable, that survival is not accidental. It means you adapted, you learned, even if unconsciously. You adjusted expectations, behavior, or boundaries. That adaptation is growth, whether you labeled it that way or not. Pain didn't end you, it shaped you. And the shape it creates depends on whether you resist it blindly or engage with it deliberately. Misplaced focus during painful moments often determines long-term damage. When attention is spent on blame, comparison, or self-pity, energy leaks away. When attention is spent on understanding, correction, and patience, pain shortens its stay. Focus doesn't remove discomfort, but it gives it direction. Direction turns suffering into experience, and experience into judgment. Pain is proof that something mattered enough to test you. Indifference produces nothing. Comfort produces little. Pressure produces clarity, not because pressure is kind, but because it is honest. If you can accept that honesty without flinching, pain becomes less of an enemy and more of a demanding teacher, one that charges a price up front, but pays back over a lifetime. Most people overestimate talent because talent is easy to notice. It shows early, it gets praised quickly, and it creates the illusion of inevitability. Discipline, on the other hand, is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't impress on day one. It looks ordinary, repetitive, even boring. That's why so many people misunderstand which one actually determines outcomes. Talent might open a door, but discipline decides whether you stay in the room long enough to build anything meaningful. Talent without discipline creates a dangerous comfort. When things come easily at the beginning, effort feels optional. Progress feels natural instead of earned. That early ease teaches the wrong lesson. That ability alone is enough. But reality doesn't reward potential. It rewards execution. And execution demands consistency, structure, and the willingness to work through periods where progress feels slow or invisible. When talent meets resistance for the first time, discipline is what determines whether someone adapts or collapses. You see this pattern everywhere. The student who understands concepts quickly but never studies regularly eventually falls behind the one who shows up every day and does the work. The employee with natural charisma but poor habits gets passed over for promotion by someone less flashy but more reliable. The athlete who relies on raw ability burns out when competition stiffens, while the disciplined one continues improving long after the spotlight fades. The gap doesn't appear immediately. It widens quietly over time. Discipline is not intensity. It's not working until exhaustion or chasing bursts of motivation. Discipline is the ability to do what needs to be done, even when the emotional reward is absent, especially when it's absent. Motivation is unpredictable. It comes and goes based on mood, circumstances, and external validation. Discipline operates regardless of those conditions. That's why it compounds. Small, repeated actions performed consistently create momentum that talent alone cannot sustain. There is a trade-off that people don't like to admit. Discipline requires sacrificing short-term comfort but long-term clarity. It means doing fewer things, not more. It means choosing repetition over novelty. Many people avoid discipline not because it's hard, but because it forces them to confront how they actually spend their time. Structure removes excuses. When your day has rules, your results become traceable, and traceability removes the comfort of blaming randomness or bad luck. Human behavior tends to drift toward what feels good now, not what pays later. That's why discipline feels restrictive at first. It limits options, it narrows focus. But that limitation is what creates power. A scattered effort across many directions produces fatigue without progress. A disciplined effort in one direction produces slow, steady gains that eventually look like overnight success to outsiders. What they don't see is the years of repetition that made the outcome inevitable. Discipline also protects you from yourself. Everyone has days of doubt, boredom, frustration, and insecurity. On those days, talent doesn't show up to save you. Discipline does. It acts like a system that carries you forward when judgment is compromised. You don't have to decide what to do each day. The decision has already been made. That removes friction. Fewer decisions mean less mental exhaustion, and less exhaustion means more consistent output. Misplaced focus is one of the biggest enemies of discipline. When priorities are unclear, effort becomes reactive. You work on what feels urgent instead of what is important. You chase validation instead of progress. You confuse activity with effectiveness. Discipline forces you to ask uncomfortable questions. Is this task moving me closer to a meaningful outcome, or is it just filling time? Am I improving something fundamental, or am I polishing something irrelevant? Without discipline, these questions are avoided because the answers demand change. Opportunity cost plays a central role here. Every disciplined choice excludes something else. Saying yes to a daily practice means saying no to distractions. Committing to long-term improvement means accepting that results will lag behind effort. Many people abandon discipline during this lag phase because they misinterpret slow feedback as failure. In reality, discipline often produces delayed results. The work compounds beneath the surface long before it becomes visible. Those who quit early never experience the payoff and then assume it never existed. There's also a social cost to discipline that people underestimate. Disciplined behavior can look boring, antisocial, or excessive to others. It often requires opting out of common habits and expectations. This creates friction. People who lack discipline may criticize those who have it, not out of malice but discomfort. Discipline exposes the gap between intention and action. That gap is uncomfortable to observe, so it's easier to dismiss the behavior than confront one's own inconsistency. Over time, discipline reshapes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries and start seeing yourself as someone who follows through. That shift is subtle but powerful. Confidence becomes grounded in evidence rather than hope. You trust yourself because your past behavior proves reliability. This internal trust reduces anxiety. When challenges arise, you don't panic as easily because you know how you respond under pressure. Discipline builds self-respect, not through words, but through repeated proof. Talent can create expectations. Discipline creates outcomes. Expectations without outcomes lead to frustration. Outcomes without hype lead to stability. Many people with talent feel burdened by who they think they should be. Disciplined people focus on who they are becoming through action. That difference affects how setbacks are processed. When a talented person fails, it threatens their identity. When a disciplined person fails, it becomes feedback. Feedback can be used. Identity wounds are harder to repair. Long-term thinking transforms discipline from a burden into a strategy. When you understand that today's effort is not meant to impress but to compound, patience becomes easier. You stop chasing shortcuts because you recognize their hidden costs. Shortcuts often save time now but create problems later. Discipline invests time now to reduce problems later. That trade-off doesn't excite the ego, but it protects the future. You don't need extraordinary discipline. You need consistent discipline applied to the right things. Small habits maintained over long periods outperform intense effort applied sporadically. The problem is that consistency doesn't feel heroic. It feels repetitive. That's why so few people commit to it and why it works so well for those who do. Discipline doesn't require you to be exceptional. It requires you to be reliable. When priorities are divided, discipline weakens. Trying to pursue too many goals at once creates internal conflict. Energy gets diluted, progress slows. Discipline thrives on clarity. When you know what matters most, saying no becomes easier. Focus sharpens, effort aligns. Without clarity, discipline feels like restraint. With clarity, it feels like direction. In the end, discipline doesn't replace talent. It reveals it. It gives ability a structure to grow within. Without discipline, talent decays. With discipline, even modest ability becomes formidable over time. This isn't a motivational belief. It's an observable pattern. Choices repeated daily shape trajectories. Discipline is simply the choice to repeat the right actions long enough for reality to respond. People like to believe that success is an individual achievement, built purely on personal effort and determination. That belief feels empowering, but it's incomplete. No one moves through life alone. The people you spend time with, listen to, and allow influence from shape your thinking long before they shape your outcomes. Relationships are not accessories to your life. They are multipliers. They quietly amplify your habits, your standards, and your sense of what is normal. Every relationship carries a cost and a return, whether you acknowledge it or not. Some relationships challenge you to grow, to think longer term, to act with discipline even when it's inconvenient. Others reward stagnation. They make poor habits feel acceptable and long-term neglect feel harmless. The danger isn't obvious toxicity. It's subtle misalignment. It's the friend who never asks about your goals. The environment where comfort is celebrated and ambition is quietly mocked. These influences don't attack you directly. They soften your edge slowly. Human behavior is deeply social. We calibrate our effort based on what we see around us. If the people closest to you settle for less, that becomes the reference point. Not because you consciously agree, but because repeated exposure normalizes it. This is why two equally capable people can end up with radically different lives simply based on who they share time with. One environment reinforces discipline, the other excuses avoidance. Over time, reinforcement wins. There is an uncomfortable trade-off involved in choosing relationships deliberately. It often requires distance from people you care about, not because they are bad, but because they are not aligned with where you are trying to go. This is difficult because loyalty feels virtuous and distancing feels selfish. But loyalty to people who pull you backward eventually becomes disloyalty to your own future. That conflict is where many people stall. They choose emotional comfort over long-term clarity and then wonder why progress feels so heavy. Relationships also shape how you respond to setbacks. When surrounded by people who think short-term, failure becomes an excuse to quit. When surrounded by people who think long-term, failure becomes a temporary data point. The same event produces different reactions depending on the mindset reinforced around you. That difference compounds. Over years, it can be the difference between resilience and resignation. Consider how advice is given in different circles. In one group, advice focuses on relief. Rest more. Stop trying so hard. Don't stress yourself. In another, advice focuses on adjustment. Refine your approach. Strengthen your skills. Stay patient. Neither is cruel. Both feel caring, but only one leads to progress when applied consistently. The advice you hear repeatedly becomes the advice you give yourself internally. Over time, your inner voice begins to sound like the people around you. Opportunity cost shows up clearly in relationships. Time spent maintaining shallow connections is time not spent building deeper ones. Emotional energy spent explaining your ambition to unsupportive people is energy not spent executing it. Many people underestimate how draining misaligned relationships can be. It's not dramatic conflict. It's constant friction. You feel misunderstood, slowed down, or subtly discouraged. That friction reduces focus. Reduced focus weakens discipline. Weak discipline delays outcomes. Strong relationships don't always feel comfortable. They ask more of you. They hold you accountable. They notice when your actions don't match your words. This can feel threatening to the ego, especially if you're used to being praised without being challenged. But challenge is a form of respect. It assumes you're capable of more. Relationships that never challenge you are often protecting their own comfort, not your growth. Long-term thinkers invest in relationships the way they invest in assets. They look for durability, alignment, and shared values. They understand that trust compounds slowly but pays dividends for decades. They don't chase popularity. They value reliability. A small circle of people who tell you the truth and push you forward is worth more than a large circle that keeps you entertained and distracted. Entertainment fades. Direction lasts. Misplaced focus in relationships often shows up as over-prioritizing approval. When decisions are filtered through how others will react, progress slows. You start negotiating with opinions instead of reality. This doesn't mean ignoring everyone. It means distinguishing between voices that offer insight and voices that seek comfort. Insight sometimes stings. Comfort always feels good in the moment. Only one improves outcomes. There's also the issue of reciprocity. Healthy relationships involve mutual investment. One-sided connections drain energy and create resentment. Over time, resentment erodes patience and focus. People who fail to set boundaries often confuse generosity with obligation. But discipline applies to relationships as much as it does to work. Knowing when to give and when to step back protects long-term stability. You can observe this in professional environments as well. Teams with clear standards and shared goals outperform groups with talent, but no cohesion. Trust allows for honest feedback. Honest feedback allows for correction. Correction improves results. When relationships lack trust, people hide mistakes, avoid responsibility, and protect image instead of outcomes. The cost is inefficiency and stagnation. The cause is relational misalignment. Emotionally, people fear being alone more than being misaligned. That fear keeps them tethered to environments that no longer fit. But solitude, when chosen deliberately, is often a bridge rather than a destination. It creates space to reset standards, clarify values, and choose connections intentionally instead of habitually. Being alone for a season can be healthier than being constantly surrounded by influences that dilute your focus. Relationships also influence patience. When everyone around you expects quick results, waiting feels like failure. When patience is modeled, waiting feels strategic. This affects how long you're willing to stay committed to a plan before abandoning it. Many long-term efforts fail not because they were wrong, but because the surrounding environment didn't support sustained belief during the slow phase. The truth is that you don't rise to your highest aspirations. You settle into your strongest environment. If your environment rewards discipline, honesty, and long-term thinking, you will gradually adopt those traits. If it rewards avoidance, shortcuts, and excuses, you will absorb those too. This is not a moral judgment. It's a pattern of influence. Choosing relationships intentionally is one of the most rational decisions you can make, even though it feels emotional. The people closest to you help determine how you spend your time, how you interpret pain, how you define success, and how long you persist when progress is slow. That influence is constant. Ignoring it doesn't make you independent. It makes you vulnerable to forces you haven't examined. Most people don't fail because they lack effort. They fail because they lack a clear sense of where they are going. Without a long-term vision, effort scatters. Energy leaks into whatever feels urgent, whatever is loudest, whatever promises the fastest relief. Vision is not about dreaming big. It's about deciding what matters enough to endure discomfort for a long time. When vision is absent, sacrifice feels pointless. When vision is clear, sacrifice becomes strategic. Human behavior is strongly influenced by immediacy. The brain is wired to favor rewards that arrive now over rewards that arrive later, even when the later reward is far greater. This bias explains why people overspend, underprepare, and abandon good plans too early. Long-term vision is the counterweight to that bias. It doesn't eliminate temptation, but it reframes it. Instead of asking, what feels good right now, you begin asking, what does this choice cost my future? That question alone changes behavior. A long-term vision forces trade-offs into the open. You can't have everything at once. Time, energy, and attention are limited. Choosing one direction means letting others go. This is uncomfortable because letting go feels like loss, even when what you're releasing was never aligned with where you want to end up. Many people avoid committing to a vision because commitment makes opportunity cost visible. As long as everything remains vague, nothing feels lost. But vagueness also prevents progress. You see this in everyday decisions. Someone says they want stability, but they consistently choose short-term excitement over long-term consistency. Someone says they want freedom, but they avoid the discipline required to build leverage. The issue is not hypocrisy, it's misalignment. Their actions reveal the absence of a clearly defined future that matters more than present comfort. Vision is what gives future rewards enough emotional weight to compete with immediate gratification. Delayed gratification is often misunderstood as denial. It's not about suffering unnecessarily or postponing joy indefinitely. It's about sequencing. It's choosing to delay certain pleasures so that future options expand rather than shrink. The person who saves instead of spending is not denying pleasure, they're purchasing flexibility. The person who practices patience in a relationship is not suppressing desire. They're protecting long-term trust. The pain of waiting is temporary. The cost of impatience is cumulative. Long-term vision also stabilizes emotions. Without it, every setback feels catastrophic because there is no broader context. A bad month feels like a failed life. With vision, setbacks are evaluated differently. They are measured against a longer timeline. You ask whether this obstacle changes the direction or simply slows the pace. Most obstacles do the latter. Vision turns emotional reactions into practical adjustments. It replaces panic with recalibration. Misplaced focus is especially destructive when vision is unclear. People chase multiple goals that conflict with each other, spreading effort thin. They want growth without discomfort, results without patience, change without disruption. Divided priorities create internal friction. You feel busy but ineffective, tired but unfulfilled. Vision simplifies. It narrows the field. It tells you what to ignore. Ignoring the wrong things is as important as focusing on the right ones. There's a quiet discipline involved in long-term thinking that rarely gets acknowledged. It requires boredom tolerance. Many meaningful efforts are repetitive and unglamorous. The feedback loop is slow. There are long stretches where nothing dramatic happens. People who quit during these stretches often assume something is wrong, when in reality this is the normal cost of building anything durable. Vision helps you endure the silence between milestones. You can observe the difference between people who think long-term and those who don't by how they react to temptation. Short-term thinkers frame temptation as an opportunity. Long-term thinkers frame it as a negotiation with their future self. They understand that future consequences are not abstract, they are simply delayed. Every shortcut taken today becomes a problem to solve tomorrow. Every disciplined choice today removes a problem tomorrow. This understanding is not moral, it's mechanical. Opportunity cost becomes sharper with vision.